Submitted for your approval. Submitted for your approval.
Another dimension.
Submitted
Light.
for your approval.
Another dimension.
Submitted
Light.
for your
Shadow.
approval.
Another dimension.
Submitted
Light.
for your
Shadow.
approval.
Another dimension. Self.
Submitted
Light.
for your
Shadow.
approval.
The Twilight Zone.
Submitted for your approval.
The Twilight Zone.
Submitted for your approval.
The Twilight Zone.
Hello, hello, hello. You're listening to a podcast not only of sound but also of mind. It's Time to Rewind is a podcast that takes a journey into a wondrous land of time loops whose boundaries are that of imagination. I'm your host, Bubba Wheat, and each episode my guest and I explore these time loops one loop at a time. This stop is Trapped in the Twilight Zone, and this is the fifth stop at 2019's Season 1, Episode 3, Replay, starting at 14 minutes and 21 seconds, with Nina blurrily opening her eyes to see the lottery numbers broadcast, and ending at 17 minutes and 13 seconds, with Officer Lasky throwing Dorian against a painting on the wall. Joining me once again is Mark from French Toast Sunday. How are you doing today?
I'm doing awesome. Hey, everybody.
So, let's go ahead and jump straight into this time loop. I did notice that the rewind effect this time feels a lot more muted than some of the previous ones. It felt like it was short, and Nina didn't seem as disoriented as she did in the previous rewinds. Do you think that it's partly because she's getting used to it, or do you think it's because she's only rewinding a couple minutes?
I think it's a couple. Well, actually, I think it's a mixture of both, because by this moment, Nina has, I don't want to say mastered, but she has wrapped her mind around the situation that she finds herself in. So she realizes what's going on and how she knows the mechanics of her time loop. That's one thing, and the fact that it wasn't a really long time. I think there's a correlation between how far back she goes. It's tied directly to her. It's a correlation between how she feels, how disoriented she is when she gets there. So I think it's a mixture of both, that she's realizing the mechanics, and it was just a few minutes. So it wasn't as daunting on her as it would have been.
Yeah, and one thing that I forgot to ask you in the last episode, do you think whenever she did this, like whenever you were watching this, did you think she was going to tell her son here about her ability to go back in time?
I think so. I mean, I think there was definitely a feeling of a pregnant pause that, she could have said something. She was like, and I think she decided against it. But I felt that, oh, maybe she would say something here about it. But then,
because this feels like in another time travel story that this lottery numbers, this is like the proof that she can time travel.
right. It was perfect there.
Yeah, but instead she's just like, if I can guess these lottery numbers, then you got to promise to come visit me more often. So instead, it's like, honestly, it makes her feel like a bit more of a manipulative character by doing this.
I can see that, definitely. I mean, honestly, I don't want to, disparage single moms out there, but her baby boy, is gone off into the big world and leaving her alone. She needs to pull some type of cards to make sure that he doesn't forget about good old mom. When he's out living his life. So I can definitely I can see the manipulation card being played there. So I definitely agree with you there.
And I did want to talk just a little bit more about the choice of using the lottery in general, because I do think that was a specific choice, and not just because I feel like it can be kind of a trope with these time travel movies, because the lottery, whenever you have the ability to go back in time and know what numbers are going to be called, it's the lottery is like the one aspect of easy money.
Definitely, and I agree with that. One thing I will add to it is that in these, oh, I'm trying to think how to properly word this, but as you mentioned, getting rich quick, the lottery is a big thing. I guess that's for anybody that's, hovering in the lower middle class,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
dream
that
of,
was the other thing, and the other aspect I was going to bring up. It is that the lottery in general, it's almost, some might call it predatory,
Mhm,
because it tends to collect money disproportionately to low income and minority families.
absolutely. And I was definitely getting around to that point. For a lot of, families, Black people and people of color, uh, the only real way of getting ahead was either someone having a life insurance policy and they're passing away, similar to, if I don't know if you've ever seen Sidney Poitier in A Raisin in the Sun, but a situation similar to that where someone passes away and there's a lump sum of money left, or hitting the lottery. You know, uh, the lottery definitely does prey on hope, and people who typically have the means to support themselves with well-paying jobs, and the lottery doesn't really, they may gamble on horses and things of that nature, definitely, but it doesn't hold the same draw for people who do live very close to the poverty line, or minority communities. So I do think that it was put there as a reason. Like it was definitely intended. It was a pointed reference with the lottery.
Yeah, it's one of those instances where, all it could take is like, five or $10, and then you'd have the potential to never have to work again
Right.
and be set for life.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I am kind of curious. What do you think is going through Dorian's head? Because whenever he goes off to get snacks, he says, "We're gonna be rich." Like, does he think that she's magic, and that she can be able to repeat this again? Because the way he says it, it almost feels like she did tell him about the time travel aspect, but we don't see her tell him in this loop, or in this episode at all, until a little, I think, two loops later down the line.
Right. Right. I don't agree in that aspect. I think of the two, I do believe that Uh, Dorian, I almost forgot his name there myself. Dorian is more of a grounded person, so I don't think that he really thought they were going to be rich, or I don't think his character to me seems a bit more grounded and matter of fact. Uh, as we referenced in the last episode, his conversation about destiny and things are kind of destined to happen. So I don't know if if he necessarily he follows through with that sentiment of actually thinking they're going to be rich. I didn't quite pick up on him. I didn't pick up on the notion that he may know about the time loop. I didn't quite get that from that scene personally, but I can see how you arrived at how one could arrive at that conclusion.
So do you think that he was just like saying it as a joke?
Yeah, that's where I'm leaning towards. Yeah.
And then this is, a bit of a shorter one, even though we do get the. I think it's funny because, now that I think about, because this series was developed for Paramount Plus, and yet we get in this loop especially, we get the commercial break moment, like whenever Officer Lasky shows up in the door, and it fades to black, and that feels like a very intentional commercial break moment, even though I don't believe Paramount Plus has commercials.
It
Or,
does.
oh,
It
it
does.
it does. Okay,
Yeah, it
I
has a
couldn't remember.
Yeah, it has a tiered system. I know this because I recently signed up for Paramount Plus. But
Yeah, I had it for a few months, but I switched off to something else, a few months ago. Like, I watched the the entire first season, and then I started the second season of the Twilight Zone, but I didn't finish it.
hmm yeah, but there is a commercial tier and there's a non-commercial tier, but yes. So I had a commercial when I got to that scene. So yes, it definitely gave you that kind of classic television. You got to come back until, right after the break, so grab your chips or something. But it definitely gave that classic television, you know, gasp at that scene. And I do believe that was quite intentional.
Yeah, and even though it does, I do think that, whenever he says someone's at the door, I think that at that moment, the audience very clearly knows that it's Officer Lasky.
Right, right. I must admit, I was hoping that it was someone else, like, hoping against hope. Well, maybe, it's her brother that they mentioned earlier in the episode, he might have, Dorian might have called him, while they were, out and about and told him at the hotel they were staying at. That's what I wanted to happen, secretly. But when, of course, that wouldn't make for great television. So to see Officer Lasky at the door, I think it really cemented what we mentioned earlier in the previous episode about the omnipresent slash, just satanic.
Satanic. Yeah, I wrote in my notes for this episode, he kind of feels like the racist Terminator.
Pretty much, yes. It's just that if the Energizer Bunny was a racist, this is Lackey. He just keeps coming and coming, and like they've done so much to avoid him, yet here he is. So you get that feeling of dread, like there's no escaping from him, and I think that's really solidified in that scene when she comes around the corner and sees Lackey at the door of their hotel. Like, really, dude? Like, why are you here?
And I also think that his character is interesting the way that he's presented because the way that he uses language is very specific and it's very proper. I like he uses like his language is it's very slow, it's very deliberate. I feel like he almost over enunciates each word, and his choice of wording is meant to be specific. In a way, it almost makes him feel less than human, just the way that he's speaking. It's like, I wasn't speaking to you. I was speaking to the young gentleman. I don't think that's the exact words, but
Close enough. That was very close to it.
yeah.
And I agree with that. I think in watching the episode, it I don't know if this was well, I'm pretty sure this was the intent of the actor, but it very much gave me the feeling that he was quoting a rule book of some sort.
Yeah.
He was quoting policy. Like he's done this before. This is a situation that he has done to another, family. And he knows that if he says this, then this will then hold up, under scrutiny, whether it be by his superiors, by court, or whatever. And that could be me. That could be me just reading into the situation. But it definitely gave me the fact that it was very mechanical. It was very deliberate, and it was very methodical. His language. It just gave me that he's quoting, the guidelines of his department in doing what he's doing.
Yeah, I think if you were to put him on like the Dungeons and Dragons alignment scale, he is very much lawful evil.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, there's nothing chaotic about his evil. It is very methodic, and it's evil, so there's not much sense to it, but it's definitely a lawful evil. I wholeheartedly agree.
And the other thing that I noticed is this is the third confrontation with him, and this is the second time that he's reached for a weapon, and both the times that he reached for the weapon, he actually goes for his taser rather than his pistol. And I think that's interesting because it shows an escalation. Like the first confrontation, he doesn't. I don't believe there's any confrontation. I believe that she hits the rewind before it escalates too far. She hits the rewind whenever he's just like, hey, what do you have? Is that a camera? And he starts reaching for the camera, and
Right.
that's whenever she rewinds the first time. And then the second time he pulls out the taser, and then this is the third time, and then he's also he pulls out the taser again, and it's
Yeah.
not until the next time whenever he escalates it even further and pulls out the pistol and shoots the son.
Hmm.
So even though there is also a definite focus on his revolver, like the camera likes to focus and show that he does have a revolver at his waist at all times.
Hmm. Right. Yeah, and maybe I think that I definitely see the escalation there, but I also think that this may have been an idea, something put forth by the production staff. As I mentioned previously in a previous episode, this episode was a bit triggering. I could see if I didn't hear much about it when the episode aired, honestly, but I could see being a black person in America watching this episode, it would have been a tough watch because it was a tough watch for me. And I think given the nature of the episode with it being a time loop, to constantly see the officer pull a gun on this young man, given the
Mm-hmm.
social climate, might have been a little too much.
And
So
whenever you were watching the episode, did you notice the difference? Did you realize that it was a taser the first two times, or did you think that he was pulling his gun?
I did notice it was a taser the first couple of times. I noticed. I'm like, okay, taser. All right, taser. This is. I mean, it's still bad. Don't
Yeah.
don't get me wrong. It shouldn't have been pulled out at all. But I did notice that, and in my head, like, okay, that could be non lethal. It's potentially non lethal.
Yeah, the intention is non-lethal, even
Right.
though, non-lethal doesn't always mean non-lethal.
Exactly. So I did notice that the first few times, and in later loops, that's not the case. But I do think that one, it serves two purposes. One, it shows an escalation in the situation in the time loops. It also, I think, it was just kind of smart on behind the scenes not to have that happen too much in the episode. To not have that imagery still is very impactful, and you don't
Mhm.
want to use it gratuitously.
So do you think that the officer is somewhat aware of the repeating time? Do you think that at least partially he keeps coming after Nina because she keeps escaping him by traveling through time? Do you think that either consciously or unconsciously or supernaturally that he's aware of her escaping him through time travel?
That is a very interesting concept. I mean, I think it's. I can see how one can reach that conclusion. I've said that before, but I can see how I can see how that can play out, and I think there's support there for it. But on my watching, it just dawned. Well, not I would say it dawned on me, but in watching it, you know, Dorian and Nina sticks out for a multitude of reasons. The biggest one is that they are, two African American people, in this smallish town driving through, and they kind of stick out like a sore thumb, and
Mhm.
that intrigues, sparks curiosity of some sort in Officer Lackey. So that's why I think that's the driving force. The fact that they're both in that diner at the same time, I think that's all the motive that he needed. But I can see the more supernatural, more instinctual side of it. That you're escaping me, and I want to I want to stop that. But I do lean more towards it just being, he saw them and he wants them gone.
Yeah, I do think that you do bring up a good point that we haven't really touched on yet, because Nina does say that this is the area that she grew up in. This is like her hometown area. Her uncle still lives in the area not too far from here, and she talks about escaping it and making a better life for herself, which even though we don't necessarily see the low incomeness, because we really just see the inside of the diner, the inside of the motel,
Hmm.
and the roads. But just based on that, this makes me think that this is like a low income small town area.
Yeah.
And because the officer, he seems okay with like the waitress Mabel, and
Mm.
and she's also a black woman, but I think that's because she's a waitress. She's in a menial job.
Right.
And Nina and her son, and she comes driving in, and he mentions that their vehicle is a Volvo, and um, I don't know. I'm not too much of a car person, so I didn't really I couldn't really tell if it was like, a high end car. I kind of got the impression that it's maybe just like a mid end car.
Well, Volvos are expensive. Volvos, I mean, when people think of luxury vehicles, you don't think of Mercedes and, BMWs and things of that nature. But Volvos, my mom had a Volvo for years when I was growing up, and they're not cheap cars. They're expensive and upkeep. So they are,
So
I went,
they're like upper middle class.
there we go. They're upper middle class.
Okay. So that this is, an a black woman and her black son
Hmm.
driving in a relatively expensive car, which
Right.
that comes into play more in the next episode, which will focus on that a bit more. But I think it is important to mention that does make them stand out, and that does play into the racist mentality of this officer. This is him seeing black people, which as a racist he would think of as lesser, but
Hmm.
they come in and they are, better than him.
Right.
They're
Right.
above him, and so that makes him feel inadequate, and so that makes him want to lash out at them and make them know that he isn't lesser, he is in fact better than him, because he wields the power of the police, the power and authority of being a police officer, and he has to hold that over them to show that he's not lesser than them, that he is actually above them in his mind.
Right. Right. Absolutely. And you'll just be so surprised how much you'll see that. Like it's I don't want people to watch this episode and think that this isn't the surreal part. The way the cop acts is not the surreal part of this episode. Trust me, it's just a camcorder. Everything else is so based and grounded in reality that it's not even funny. And as I mentioned in the previous episode, uh, Twilight Zone is known for its surreal. It's known for taking these grounded situations, putting a surreal twist on it, and making it extraordinary. But the way this officer is acting, and his motivations are definitely not surreal. This is not an exaggeration.
So, uh, so I suppose I should ask you, and if I end up hitting on a more sensitive subject that you don't want to talk about, that's perfectly fine. But have you ever had a personal experience, or someone close to you has had a personal experience with the cops?
Ooh, okay. So I'm thinking I've been lucky enough personally, and this is odd, thank God. I have not been in too many situations where I've had that particular problem with police officers. Uh, there's one instance. It wasn't involving law enforcement. It was involving a neighbor. Uh, mentioned in the last episode. I'm a member of French Toast Sunday. It's a podcast, and we used to podcast at our friend Jay's house. Jay lived with his mom. Now, Jay, we would podcast at night, and Jay lived in like a suburban neighborhood in the suburbs, this East Baltimore County, because we're in Maryland. So we'll just walk up to the yard and go in the basement and just wait. That's that's where we podcasted at. So I was known at the time for wearing very, very bright polos. I mean, almost gaudy bright, neon yellow, greens, oranges. It was my thing. Not only were my polos neon colored, but they had like the extra large horse on them. It was the big pony collection. Looking back on it, it was, yikes. But it was roughly 11, 12 years ago. So it was good back then. So I meet a larger black man in a brightly colored polo walking into, the yard of, my friend. And we podcasted on one night, and the next day we were over. They had a pool, so we were swimming in the pool. And my friend Jay mentioned, like, hey, Mark, my neighbors talked to me this morning, and they essentially almost called the police on you because they saw you going into the yard. And Jay had to tell them, like, no, that's my friend. He's welcome here. He's supposed that he didn't do anything wrong, but they saw me. I was not the only person who went into the yard, but they saw me, and I was the only, black person. So, that could have been a situation where the cops could have been called, and that might have been, it might not have ended well for me. So it's something that being a person of color, you have to be wary of that in your daily surroundings and how you move and how you act. So you have to take all these extra steps to minimize the ability of, getting involved with law enforcement or someone that's calling law enforcement on you. So granted, yet again, I'm so happy that I've not had any direct run-ins with the law in that regard. But I've had a few close calls, and that being one that I can mention, on the podcast. Other ones, are a little, I would rather not. But, it's something that it's a part of day-to-day life being black or a person of color in America. And most people don't necessarily understand that or really deeply understand how that can affect you. Like we have to look at things completely differently. So to prevent that from happening and still not be successful sometimes. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's something that, and as I mentioned, I'm a middle-aged middle class white guy, and I'm someone, I try to be sensitive, I try to be open-minded, but every time I hear these type of stories, it is just so difficult to wrap my head around the type of things that a person of color has to experience living in America, because it is so far removed with how I grew up and how I'm able to live basically a privileged life. I've had money issues. I've been pulled over for silly reasons a couple times, but I get the I get the anxiety whenever I see the flashing lights, but it is so far removed from the type of anxiety that I can imagine that I would feel if I was a black person. That
Right.
It's just so far removed. It's so hard for me to wrap my head around it, and I just it might feel weird to say, but it makes me just feel lucky that I am white.
Yeah, I mean it's definitely there's a benefit. There is a benefit. I wish I could think of her name right now, but there's a woman. Oh God, I can't think of her name right now. I'm so upset. But she does like racial trainings around the country. I would say around the world, but she definitely does it in America, where she takes people and she divides them into groups by color of their eyes. So light-eyed people are put to the left, dark-eyed people are put to the right, and most light-eyed people typically, phenotypically, are Caucasian, they're white, and she then proceeds to treat them as if they were black. And it's a very interesting case study. And she does this class all over the place. And you can watch videos of it on YouTube. And it's just, unfortunately, it's an aspect of human nature. You really don't understand things unless it happens to you directly. And it shouldn't be that way, honestly. We should have enough empathy for people to, understand what they're going through by them telling us what they're going through. But in most cases, we only truly understand things when it happens to us. And the class is really a revelation for people. People storm out, they get angry, and I think her first name is Ellen. I had to look up the rest of it, but it's you can watch her videos on YouTube. She has interviews and things, and it's very, very interesting. But sometimes that's what it takes. People being open to dialogue and seeing it from another person's point of view. So yeah, if we did that more often, we may not be in the social climate that we're currently in.
Yeah. But, I think it's a good time to bring things a little bit lighter, and
Right.
and that's all I have for this loop, in terms of the actual content. I guess before I get into the classic episode, was there anything else that you wanted to say about this loop?
No, this loop was thankfully it was a short loop. Uh, so it was short, it was impactful, and I'm just very glad that I am not the guest for the next loop. That I will say, like, yeah, I'm glad that that's the one that I'm not on.
All right, so the classic episode that I chose to bring up for this episode is A Most Unusual Camera, and that's from season 2, episode 10. And I did this because there is a direct connection between that episode and this one, because this classic episode, it's about these two like two big criminals, like grifters. They had stolen, they robbed like an antique shop, and it turns out that most of the antiques that they stole were fakes, even though that there's like a newspaper article where the antique shop was listing everything, and they were heavily inflating everything that they stole, for insurance purposes. And but they have this camera, and they end up taking a picture. The guy takes a picture of his wife at the window, and then a couple minutes later, or a little bit later, it pops up like a Polaroid,
Mm.
and it's her, but it's her wearing a fur coat. And he's like, oh, this must be like some sort of trick camera. And then eventually they open this suitcase that they haven't opened yet, and there's a fur coat inside, and then she wears it, and then she goes to the window and is posing just like she was in the camera, and they figure out that the camera takes pictures 5 minutes into the future.
Ah.
And so it's the next picture they take shows her brother at the door, and they're like, that doesn't make any sense because her brother's in jail and he doesn't get out for another 7 years. And then lo and behold, a couple minutes later, her brother pops through the door. And so they take it to the racetrack, and they use it to win a bunch of money betting on horses by taking a picture of the winner board and then betting on the winning horse. And then they come back to the hotel, and this French a bellhop, or the room service guy, comes in, and he notices that written on a plaque on the camera, it says 10 à la propriétaire, which means 10 per owner. And so they figure out that that means that they're only able to take 10 pictures, and they've already taken 8.
Mm.
So they only have 2 left. And the reason that I chose this is I don't think we can see it in either of these 2 loops that we discussed, but at one point you can see on the side of the camcorder there is a label that says 10 à la propriétaire.
Wow. Okay.
And so that's, and because she doesn't hit rewind 10 times over the course of the episode. I think she only hits it like 7 or 8.
Mm-hmm.
But so that is definitely just a reference to this episode. And then this is a more comedic episode, that's the man and his wife and the brother, they bicker through most of the episode, and it's funny for the most part. And then, they take a picture, they accidentally take a picture, and it's the wife, like, recoiling in horror, and they're like, they start accusing each other. It's like, maybe it's because her brother got jealous and started attacking her husband with a knife. And it's like, well, maybe her husband was mad at her brother and started attacking him. And then they fight and they fall out the window and die in the courtyard. And then she takes a picture of the bodies because she's like, she's not that upset because she has all the money for herself. But then the French guy comes back in and he starts gathering up the money, and he's like, I'm here to do laundry. And she's like, what are you talking about? Well, because there's a couple dead bodies in the courtyard, and I did some digging, and you all are wanted by the police, and the police should be coming here pretty soon. So I'm just going to take this as payment for not saying anything. And then the picture comes out, and the French guy looks at it. He's like, oh, there's more than 2 bodies out here. And, the wife's like, what? And then she goes to the window and she trips and she falls out the window.
Oh, wow.
And then the French guy goes over and he's like, ha 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 ha. And then he looks, there are, 1, 2, 3, 4 bodies. And then this is the part where it's just gets stupid, like, because he doesn't trip. He's just like, le gasp. And then he falls out the window.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, that's a bit hokey. But again, what season episode is this? 'Cause I want to watch these episodes now.
This one is season 2, episode 10, A Most Unusual Camera.
Got it.
And so this one's just it's another it's one of the more comedic episodes, I thought, and I did enjoy most of the episode up until the incredibly stupid ending.
Right. Yeah, it's amazing how an ending can ruin the whole show for you. Game of Thrones, but it happens sometimes.
Yeah, but I think that we really stretch. I think we talked plenty about this. Like, I think 7 minutes of this episode. We stretched it out long enough, but I'd like to thank you for talking with me about this. It was a joy to have you on, and I think we covered a lot of heavy things and a lot of light things, and I think it was a good episode.
Well, thank you for having me, Bubba. I would love coming back again. So anytime, sir, I'll be here.
And then, why don't you go ahead and quickly mention where people can find you online?
All right, guys, you can find me and my other French Toast Sunday associates on FrenchToastSunday.com. French and toast spelled normally, and Sunday like the day. We haven't podcasted in quite some time. The pandemic has put that on hold for us, but There are still reviews. We have over 300 episodes that you can listen to through Spotify, iTunes, pretty much wherever you can find podcasts, you can find our stuff. And we're out there, and please listen to us.
And as always, I am Bubba Wheat, and you can find me at flightstights@movienights.com. You can find me on Twitter at Bubba Wheat. You can find this show, It's Time to Rewind, on Anchor.fm, as well as anywhere else that you listen to podcasts. And we also have a Facebook group, It's Time to Rewind, a time loop group. You can join that to discuss episodes as they come out, or discuss time loop movies or TV episodes, past, present, or future. So until next time, I will still be here, trapped in the Twilight Zone.
Submitted for your approval. Submitted for your approval.
Another dimension.
Submitted
Light.
for your approval.
Another dimension.
Submitted
Light.
for your
Shadow.
approval.
Another dimension.
Submitted
Light.
for your
Shadow.
approval.
Another dimension. Self.
Submitted
Light.
for your
Shadow.
approval.
Another Twilight Zone.
Submitted for your approval.
The Twilight Zone.
Submitted for your approval.
The Twilight Zone.
We'll get us some snacks. We gonna be rich. We gonna be rich. Come on, there's someone out here.